Hello, and welcome to this special edition of the Network Collective Short Take. Today's Short Take episode is being sponsored by Anuta Networks. Now, this is the second time that Anuta has been on the show, and once again, they've bravely asked someone who uses their products to share their experiences with the Anuta Atom platform. Listen in as we explore how multi-vendor analytics, assurance, and orchestration are being approached in the real world, and how Anuta can help you achieve these goals. So Ryan, before jumping into the topic at hand, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're currently working, and how you came to be engaged with the Anuta platform?
That sounds great. Thanks, Jordan. Thanks for having me. My name is Ryan Lynn. I started my career in networking over 20 years ago, and I've spent about 13 of that 20 working on very large-scale global networks and data centers. The last 7 years, I've been with a company called Trace3, which is a strategic technology partner that really focuses on emerging technology. I'm a VP of emerging architecture for our mountain states, where I lead a team of consultants in really three areas. Cloud environments, which include, private, public, hybrid, multi-cloud, which, we all know that networking is a big component of those things. Next generation security platforms, and then lastly, data intelligence and analytics. And so my primary role is really to help clients solve problems by, finding and using emerging technologies. And in the case of Anuta Networks, which we found a few years ago, we were really searching for technologies that could help clients transform that network operations.
All right. Well, before we dive into specifically, all the great things about Anuta, I'd like to start conversations about products by framing the challenges that they're looking to solve. I think oftentimes we get the cart before the horse, and sometimes we have solutions before we have real problems. And I don't think that that's the case here. So from your perspective, what do you think are some of the challenges with the traditional models and approaches to network analytics and assurance?
Well, Jordan, I think if you look at where we've been and how networking has grown up over the years, we have had some early issues, right? The most obvious one is the closed system of devices that we've seen from that vendor landscape. We have uniqueness in operations, capabilities, the formatting of the data between the devices is different. And what that's led to is things like point analytics solutions, where it's very vendor specific. It's been anchored to a specific format. And then largely analytics in general in networking has been very piecemeal and very manual. We've had to really kind of piece together different analytics sets across different types of solutions. The good thing is that things are opening up there and we're seeing access to new data. But beyond that one challenge, we still have a large amount of volume of data coming off the network. So the question becomes, how do we extract that data? How do we ingest it into some modern platform? How do we draw correlations across different types of data where there's kind of an inherent lack of standards? So once you have that data, knowing which questions to ask and more importantly, how to ask those questions is still challenging. We've also got resource challenges where we all know that we have limited operations staff trying to sift through mounds and mounds of data. And so really when you take a look at those three elements of people, process, and technology, trying to solve it right now could be a pretty expensive proposition.
No, that's really interesting because it's just so true, because there's always, we have, it always feels like more data is the answer, right? Like I need this piece of data because last time I missed this piece of data and it wasn't as, and that piece of data I needed to make a good decision. But the more data we have, the harder it is to sift through that. So what do you think is changing? So we said that these are some of the traditional challenges. We think that, there's solutions out there that do better. What are some of the things that are happening now that say that this is a solvable problem?
Yeah, I think the first thing you have to look at is in order to have effective analytics in any area, specifically in network and certainly in the insurance area, you have to have access to the data. That's the first thing. So the first solution we've seen is that opening up of the devices and being able to access the data through very common mechanisms, things like APIs, integration points. It's so important, right? So we're also seeing other mechanisms of obtaining the data that tend to kind of change the model of that pull model we're used to. And that's things like streaming telemetry, right? And so we're seeing that rise. The other thing we're seeing is just the prevalence of mature data platforms. Right now we have platforms that can ingest, transform, prep that data more efficiently, and they're not proprietary, they're definitely open. And then, that allows us to do that analytics and insight, and that's made better today and easier through things like machine learning algorithms and data science and modeling. So I think we're seeing a combination of several points coming together at the right time to really enable proper solutions in the area of network analytics and assurance.
You brought up a couple of things there that they're pretty popular terms right now, but I think that they kind of lack some definition. So let's take a couple seconds. When you say streaming telemetry, what do you mean there?
Well, I think if you look at like how we get telemetry from the network, traditionally we've seen this pull model, right, where we've extracted data from the device. I mean, I think the easiest example to illustrate there is SNMP, which I'm fairly confident has been in use since the early 1900s. Even more than that, like if you look at modern API access, it's also a pull mechanism, right? And so when you look at streaming telemetry, it works more like a push model. Okay, so the device itself is now initiating data exchange by streaming that data to the destination. Okay, and we're also seeing improvements in that data model structure. I mean, it's not to imply that SNMP didn't have data structure, because it certainly did, but we're seeing a more modern approach to how that data is being modeled in formats like Yang. And it's really unifying network under a broader umbrella of technology, because Yang is used all over the place inside of application and inside of, computing and those types of things. So streaming, so like what's the benefit of streaming, right? So we should be able to get higher fidelity of the telemetry data, in addition to a more real-time view of what's happening on the network, which I think is really important for, making decisions, especially if you're looking to automate things.
And that kind of leads us back to the point we were just making a minute ago, that more data isn't necessarily always better unless you can do something actionable with that. And I think that's the other piece that you mentioned there was machine learning. That's another one of those really popular terms right now. I think that there's a lot of definitions. I mean, there's some, I think it's getting conflated with AI.
Right.
I think the two are kind of interrelated, but aren't necessarily the same. What's your take on that? Like, what do you think about machine learning and AI?
Sure. So Jordan, I'm sure if like you turned on the TV right now or browsed any website, like we're going to see that AI is running the world. I think the term is a bit misleading, right? So academically, AI or artificial intelligence really is the umbrella term that describes a larger initiative where we're trying to have machines mimic human attributes. Okay, so we're looking at things like vision, robotics, language, learning. And so you take the last one, and that's the area that most of the effort has been focused around lately, that idea of machine learning. So we're not talking about AI as a very specific thing. Machine learning is sort of a subcategory. So if you look at, well, how does that work in context with networking? Well, think about the way you and I learned everything we know about networks. It was from constant exposure to the network. We absorbed data, and then we use that to train ourselves to understand what those data points mean, right? So more interaction leads to more data, which leads to more learning. So machine learning, in the same token, relies on a massive amount of data to understand the patterns and really draw conclusions from what it's seeing. So the data is sort of pumped through data models. And again, more data means more learning. And once you've trained that model to understand that these are what the elements mean, then that algorithm is capable of either automating or, with human help, spotting patterns, making decisions, looking for trends, things like that.
I mean, almost to me, and my take on it is contextualizing that data. We're taking that data and we're providing context around it, because it's no longer just a number. It's a number in relation to other numbers, which is the way our mind works, right? The idea, this is why I think it gets conflated with AI. So if we're looking at AI, and AI is, we think about our intelligence is being able to take disparate data points and somehow combine them and mash them together to make something useful out of them. That's been the hard part, right, about information and data in a computer world, because it's two unique pieces of data, and how do you teach it to do that? So I agree. That's kind of the step we're heading there. I think AI is one of those terms that we're getting there.
Yeah.
Not quite, but machine learning is definitely making a difference, and we're seeing it in more and more products.
Yeah.
I think the challenge here, right, is these are really cool ideas as technologists, right? Like streaming telemetry and machine learning and AI, and we all get very excited about them. I think what's been hard is how to make those things practical. So as a practitioner, as an engineer, as somebody who's running a network today, what does this mean? Like, what does this practically mean? Like, how do I, both in the short term and in the long term, how do I take advantage of these things?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think, it comes down to the maturity of the organization. I think that ultimately reveals the path that most of our clients end up choosing. Take an extremely mature network operations group and couple them with very strong development, very strong data intelligence people. And I think they're going to take a more long-term approach, right? And what does that mean? So it means they probably have a very highly programmatic network, very open telemetry. They probably use automation as a foundation. They probably have extreme development maturity and able to write applications that query that data, correlate that data, extract it. You probably have the right resources and have implemented the right processes. And so clients who have these tend to go more on an autonomous journey. They tend to want to do it themselves. But I got to tell you, Jordan, like majority of the clients I talk to, they're just not at this level, right? So to your point, how do they get started? Well, they need fundamental help. They need fundamental help with things that we mentioned before, automation. They need help in just getting data, analyzing it, putting it on some platform and drawing conclusions from it. And they probably haven't evolved their staff or their processes to that next level of maturity. And so in talking with clients, this is generally where they say, well, so Ryan, we're really behind and we are probably not a good candidate to go out on our own with everything. So like, how can we accelerate that time to value with network transformation? And I think this is where we look to emerging platform players like Anuta Networks.
So you've done some work with them. I mean, so your role, right, as you explained at the beginning of the show, you're an integrator. So you've done this with multiple organizations. So based off that experience, because you've had your hands in it for a while, what is Anuta doing that helps customer take advantage of these better analytics and assurance and orchestration and things like this?
Well, I think if you look at the approach the industry's had historically, it's been, buy this tool for this, buy that tool for that, very much point solutions. And so clients like that time to value of point solutions, but they don't like the lock-in, they don't like the isolation, they don't like the inflexibility. And so this is where Anuta Atom really starts to show its strengths, right? It's a platform approach, which allows for a very solid foundation of capability while being completely flexible. That avoids that lock-in. You're able to customize and sort of expand upon it. It's multi-vendor, okay? So you're able to see across the entire service chain, which mitigates that isolation approach. Data gathering from all the devices really allows you to capture kind of that single source of truth of the network, which is going to be super important to being able to draw analytics decisions. So once you have the data, the question becomes, well, what do you do with it? So the Atom platform has automation as really the core component or the core capability for things like provisioning and sort of managing the network. But they also have the data there, so it makes them a great place to be able to open up that data to analytics using what we talked about, that modern sort of data science and machine learning. And what that allows you to do is really, start to draw insights from the network based on the operating state, okay? So a secondary approach to that is really around compliance and assurance and how you're expecting the network to be operating at that moment. So if you take a look at all of those areas of the network, that's not a trivial set of functionality for a platform to perform. So one of the things that we talk with clients a lot about is just the platform itself, because they expect if it's going to be handling all of those things, and it's that volume of data and it's that critical, boy, it better be rock solid underneath and it better be easily integrated into other things that I have. So when you look at Atom, it's based on open standards. We talked about things like Yang for modeling, popular programming languages that are dominating the industry, like Python for extensibility. And so when you look at things like that, it starts to really, show the true power of the platform. In addition to, the idea of, hey, we're talking about networks that have thousands of nodes potentially, have enormous amounts of data. How are you architecting a platform like this to be able to scale and sort of take advantage of things like that? Well, Anuta, the Atom platform is built upon the same principles that modern applications are built upon. And they're using things like microservices, containers, message buses, the idea of stateless applications to really start to solve for this. And so that really allows them sort of under the hood to be able to expand out to meet a lot of those demands.
That scale issue is one of those things that just comes to front of mind as we talk about our networks getting larger. They're getting more complex, even though everyone keeps telling us that they're getting simpler. We're seeing more and more data. And in that, we've already had issues in this scaling, right? When we talk about our monitoring platforms, I know I could picture, and I'm not going to name names, of platforms that have just been incredibly difficult to get up beyond just a few hundred nodes, because all of a sudden it becomes really, really difficult. So I think this is one of those really strong things from Anuta specifically, is the fact that they have built on this horizontally scalable infrastructure. It will grow so long as you feed it enough resources to whatever size you need it to go, which is, I think it's a really strong suit. So we've spent a bit of time. Now this is one of my favorite things. So we spent a bit of time talking about all these new things, and everyone loves to do this. We'd like to talk about all the things that are coming and all the fancy new technologies. We talked about practical applications, and I like that. What does it mean for a networker? So in the next few years, you talked about a lot of tools here that maybe networkers aren't real familiar with. And so in the next few years, what do you think that role is going to look like, and what should networkers be doing to get ready for what's coming?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, one thing I've learned, certainly in the tech industry, Jordan, is that we are awful at predicting the future.
Industry experts are the worst at predicting the future, by the way.
I actually think that I thought HD DVD was going to be Blu-ray at some point. So I'm probably not the best person. So I'm a little skeptical to predict anything too far in the future, but I think I could probably hedge a few bets and mention things that are emerging now and likely to keep trending in the foreseeable future. So let's start with an easy one, right? Network bandwidth will continue to increase. I think that's no surprise to anybody. I mean, we're seeing great adoption for 100 gig. We're seeing 400 gig next year. We're probably going to see 1.6 terabits very closely on the horizon. So to your point, networks are going to get bigger. As far as bandwidth, they're also going to spread out a lot more, right? So IoT and other edge initiatives are going to drag that network out to places we never dreamed it was going to be, which puts a heavy emphasis on how you manage the network going forward. There's no mystery in the idea that we're seeing open devices. We're seeing increased automation. It's nearly 2019. If you're not taking advantage of automation, you're likely going to be left behind, right? So I think that's a very real thing. Another interesting area we're seeing, which I think is worth mentioning, is just the contribution in terms of code and scripts to the open community through things like software repos. Like, we're seeing a huge amount of upswing in that. And I think that's a great sign that we're seeing better collaboration in the industry, in people understanding that we're all trying to solve the same problems. So let's stop isolating our solutions a little bit, start opening them up, which I think is pretty much part and parcel for the open source community, which I think is great. We have clients say, yeah, automation's great, but the complexity of managing the network is still there. Jordan, you made mention to it earlier, the network isn't getting any easier. So we're seeing things like intent-based programming or intent-based networking as sort of the next shiny button that everybody's sort of looking at. And that's really where we're going to be able to describe to an algorithm the desired outcome or the desired end state of the network. And that algorithm is going to have a very keen idea of the running state and is going to be able to deduce, hey, here are the complex command sets that I need to instantiate in order to make the running state, right? So I think we're going to see that capability working into several areas of networking. And I think the last thing really is as the network matures, we're going to see a tighter integration set of the network into that tech stack where, network analytics is going to fuel insight. And we're going to see things like automation, self-provisioning, that's really going to empower that programmatic approach and really take us to that consumption model that we want, which is hybrid cloud. So I think those are the main things. And so to your point, what can people do? I think people need to start connecting with each other and really start learning a lot more, opening the network up so that people are sort of able to use each other as examples for how we should be evolving these things.
Man, I love that answer. I don't know if you know this or not, but that's completely what Network Collective is based off of. The whole idea is connecting network engineers. Our motto is literally connecting the people who connect the world. That's really cool. That's a good answer. I might be a little biased. So thanks, Ryan, for coming on, especially to talk about your experience with Anuta. Thanks to all of you who spent the time listening to this short take. If you'd like to find out more about how Anuta can help you with network assurance and orchestration, you can head on over to anutanetworks.com/collective. There you'll find lots of great information, some white papers, case studies, and you can even demo the platform for yourself. Thanks again to you all, and we'll see you next time.